If you had to survive in a world without electricity, what would you do when darkness fell? In ancient Egypt, night was more than the absence of sunlight. It meant hidden thieves, dangerous animals, venomous snakes, and, according to their beliefs, invisible forces lurking beyond the human world. Yet the Egyptians were far from helpless. They studied the stars to measure time, used water clocks to track the hours, designed their homes to withstand brutal temperatures, and even performed protective rituals before sleep. So what was it really like to survive a single night in ancient Egypt? When darkness covered the Nile, some Egyptians did not go to sleep. They went to work. High above the temple grounds, priests known as the Hour Watchers carefully observed the night sky. Using simple astronomical instruments such as the Merkhet and a plumb line, they tracked the movement of stars and helped establish direction and time. To modern eyes, the desert sky may have looked like an endless ocean of stars. To these priests, it was a clock. They divided the night using groups of stars called decans. As different decans appeared across the sky, they marked the passing hours. But there was a problem. Nighttime did not last the same length throughout the year. Winter nights were longer, while summer nights were shorter, so the Egyptians developed another ingenious solution: the water clock. Water slowly dripped through a small opening in a stone vessel, allowing priests to measure the passage of time even when clouds or darkness obscured the stars. And then came an even stranger discovery. Ancient Egyptian records may preserve observations of Algol, a star whose brightness changes periodically. Thousands of years before modern astronomy explained why, Egyptian observers were already watching the heavens closely enough to notice its mysterious rhythm. But measuring the night was only half the battle. Once the sun disappeared, Egypt's desert could become brutally cold. After scorching days, temperatures could drop sharply, creating a dangerous contrast that tested the limits of the human body. So how did ordinary families survive? Their greatest defense was not advanced machinery. It was the house itself. Thick mud brick walls absorbed the intense heat of the day and slowly released it after sunset, helping stabilize the temperature inside. Instead of filling their homes with smoke from constant fires, Egyptians could rely on the thermal properties of the materials around them. But summer demanded a completely different strategy. When the heat remained trapped inside, families could move their sleeping mats onto flat rooftops, where the night air was cooler and breezes from the Nile offered relief. Porous pottery vessels filled with water could also encourage evaporative cooling, while linen coverings helped create a more comfortable sleeping space. And then there was one of the strangest objects in an Egyptian bedroom: the headrest. Made from wood or stone, the curved wars elevated the sleeper's head above the sleeping surface. It was hard, uncomfortable by modern standards, but practical. In a world filled with insects, scorpions, and other nighttime hazards, even the way you slept could become a matter of survival. But for the ancient Egyptians, surviving the night was not only about temperature, darkness, or dangerous animals. There was another danger they feared even more: what might happen while they were asleep. Sleep could be viewed as a vulnerable state, when the boundaries between the physical world and the supernatural became dangerously thin. The soul, known as the Ba, was believed to have a connection to realms beyond ordinary human experience. And that raised a frightening question. What if something followed you into your dreams? The Egyptians had an answer. They used protective magic, known as Heka, along with images and objects believed to guard the sleeper. Two protective figures appeared frequently in Egyptian life: Bez, a fierce-looking dwarf deity, and Tauret, the pregnant hippopotamus goddess associated with protection. Dreams themselves were also taken seriously. The ancient dream book recorded interpretations for different dreams, distinguishing between favorable and unfavorable signs. Some interpretations could be surprisingly strange. Dreaming of your own death, for example, could actually be considered a positive omen. And when a nightmare became terrifying enough, protective rituals could be performed. For the Egyptians, darkness did not simply surround the sleeping body. It surrounded the mind, the soul, and everything they believed might be waiting beyond the edge of consciousness. While most Egyptians slept behind mud brick walls and protective charms, another group was beginning its shift. The Medjay patrolled the darkness. Originally associated with Nubian warriors, the Medjay became an important force in Egyptian security, guarding sensitive areas, settlements, and royal sites. Their work became especially important after sunset, when darkness provided the perfect cover for criminals. And among their most dangerous enemies were tomb robbers. Deep beneath the desert, thieves could spend hours breaking into royal tombs, searching for gold, precious objects, and anything valuable enough to sell. Every sound mattered. Every torch in the distance could mean discovery. But human criminals were not the only threat after dark. The Nile itself could become dangerous. Hippos emerged at night to feed along the riverbanks, and despite their seemingly slow and harmless appearance, they were fiercely territorial animals. A person approaching the water after sunset could be entering the territory of one of the most dangerous creatures in ancient Egypt. Think about that for a moment. Darkness meant more than simply not being able to see. It changed the entire landscape. The roads became harder to navigate. The river became more dangerous. Tombs became targets, and every strange sound in the darkness demanded attention. For those who worked through the night, darkness was not an escape from danger. It was their workplace. Yet the Egyptians did more than simply survive the night. Their constant observation of darkness helped them build a remarkably sophisticated understanding of time. The movement of stars, the changing seasons, and the cycles of the sun became part of a system that connected everyday life with the heavens. The night was measured. The seasons were tracked, the calendar was organized, and this relationship between astronomy and daily life had practical consequences. The annual appearance of Sirius, known to the Egyptians as Sopdet, was closely associated with the coming of the Nile's annual flooding, a natural event that could determine the future of agriculture. But perhaps the most fascinating lesson was not technological. The Egyptians did not try to eliminate darkness. They learned to live with it. They adapted their homes to the climate, watched the stars to understand time, developed tools to measure the passing hours, and surrounded sleep with rituals that made an uncertain world feel more predictable. In their eyes, order had to be maintained even when the sun disappeared. And that idea reached far beyond a single night. Because when we look at the ancient Egyptian obsession with time, stars, dreams, and darkness, we begin to see something deeply human. They were doing what we still do today. They were looking into the unknown and trying to understand it before it could frighten them. And then, after hours of darkness, the first light finally appeared over the Nile. Imagine standing there. The stars slowly disappeared. The eastern horizon turned gold. Birds began calling from the riverbanks, and another day of ancient Egyptian life was about to begin. But before we leave that world behind, ask yourself one question. Would you have been able to sleep peacefully in an ancient Egyptian home, knowing that outside there were scorpions, snakes, thieves, wild animals, and, according to their beliefs, supernatural forces moving through the darkness? Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the ancient Egyptians was not that they feared the night. It was that they refused to remain helpless before it. They turned stars into clocks, water into timekeepers, mud bricks into thermal protection, and religious rituals into psychological shields against the unknown. The darkness was never truly empty. It was a world they watched, measured, feared, and ultimately learned to understand. So, if you had lived beside the Nile thousands of years ago, what would you have feared most after sunset? The desert, the river, the thieves, or the things you could not see? Tell us your answer in the comments, because sometimes the most fascinating part of ancient history is not discovering how different they were from us, but realizing how much they were exactly like us.